The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floor of First National Bank as Marcus Thompson pushed through the heavy glass doors. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing, though today he wore nothing that would suggest his true status. A simple navy polo shirt, pressed khaki pants, and comfortable walking shoes. The uniform of a man who had learned that real power didn't need to announce itself. The bank's interior was a testament to old money and older traditions. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, while mahogany panels gleamed under warm lighting. Marcus approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair was typing furiously on her computer. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice steady and polite. "I need to speak with Mr. Williams about an investment matter." Sarah looked up from her screen, her eyes automatically scanning Marcus from head to toe. The assessment was swift and, in her mind, decisive. Her lips curved into what could generously be called a smile, though it held no warmth. "Investment?" she repeated, the word dripping with barely concealed amusement. "Do you have an account with us? The minimum balance for VIP services is $500,000. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, that same constriction he'd experienced countless times before, in boardrooms and country clubs, at charity galas and business lunches. His heart began to race, though he kept his expression neutral. The anticipation of what was to come mixed with a deep, weary sadness that never quite left him. "I understand your policies," he replied, reaching into his black leather briefcase with hands that trembled slightly from the effort of maintaining control. "Please inform Mr. Williams that I'd like to discuss a $2.3 billion investment." Sarah's laugh was sharp and cutting. "$2.3 billion? Sir, are you sure you're in the right place? The community bank is down the street." As Marcus withdrew a thick folder of documents and a matte black card with no visible markings, he felt the weight of every stare in the lobby. Some customers glanced over with mild curiosity, others with the kind of knowing look that said they understood exactly what was happening. But none of them knew who he really was, or the decision he was about to make that would shake this institution to its very foundation. The black card caught the light for just a moment, revealing an embossed logo that would have meant everything to anyone who truly understood high-level finance. But Sarah was too busy enjoying her moment of perceived superiority to notice what Marcus held in his increasingly steady hands. Marcus's pulse quickened as he stepped deeper into the bank's opulent VIP area, though he fought to keep his breathing steady. The familiar anxiety of being judged before he even spoke crept up his spine, a sensation he'd never quite learned to ignore despite decades of success. He knew he was walking into a space where his presence would be questioned, his worth doubted, his very right to be there challenged. "Ma'am, I really do need to speak with Mr. Williams," he said, his voice carrying just the slightest tremor of restrained emotion. "This is regarding Thompson Investment Group." Sarah's expression shifted from mild amusement to open skepticism. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying Marcus as if he were a particularly interesting specimen in a zoo. "Thompson Investment Group?" She made no effort to hide her doubt. "I've never heard of it. And frankly, sir, we don't typically accommodate walk-in appointments, especially not for—" She paused, letting her eyes travel over his casual attire once more. "Especially not without proper verification." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt his face grow warm, not with embarrassment, but with a familiar anger that he'd learned to swallow, to digest, to transform into fuel. This wasn't about his clothes or his lack of an appointment. He knew exactly what this was about, just as he'd known it would happen the moment he decided to enter this bank dressed as an ordinary man rather than the billionaire CEO he was. Inside his chest, his heart hammered against his ribs. A voice in his head screamed the truth. that he owned more wealth than most of the bank's executives would see in their lifetimes, that his investment portfolio could fund small countries, that the very institution they were sitting in depended on clients exactly like him. But another part of him, the part that had learned patience through pain, whispered for him to wait, to let this play out, to gather the evidence he would need. "I understand your caution," Marcus said, his voice growing more controlled even as his emotions threatened to overflow. "But I assure you Mr. Williams would want to take this meeting. We're discussing expanding our current partnership. Our firm currently holds significant assets with First National." Sarah's laugh was even sharper this time. "Significant assets? Sir, I process the accounts for all our major investors. If you had significant assets here, I would know about it." She picked up her phone. "I think it might be best if I call security. We have protocols about individuals who make unrealistic claims." Marcus felt the familiar sensation of being diminished, reduced from a human being with thoughts, feelings, and accomplishments to nothing more than a perceived threat. The injustice of it burned in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He had learned long ago that losing his temper would only confirm their worst assumptions about him. "Please," he said quietly, pulling out a simple business card that bore only his name and phone number. "Just tell him Marcus Thompson is here." But Sarah had already made up her mind. In her world, real money announced itself with Italian suits and Swiss watches, with the right accent and the right connections. A black man in casual clothes making billion-dollar claims? That was either delusion or deception, and either way, it wasn't her problem to solve. 2.3 billion? Sarah's voice rose loud enough to draw attention from other customers in the lobby. Her laughter carried across the marble expanse, sharp and cruel. "Sir, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a serious financial institution. I'm calling security." The laughter cut through Marcus like a blade, each note a reminder of every time he'd been dismissed, doubted, or denied simply because of the color of his skin. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who looked like him, who had walked through these doors and been made to feel less than human. A new voice interrupted the scene. "Sarah, what seems to be the problem here?" David Chen approached with the swagger of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. At 35, he wore his authority like his expensive suit, perfectly tailored and impossible to miss. His dark hair was slicked back, his tie bore the subtle pattern of wealth, and his smile held all the warmth of a shark circling wounded prey. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "This gentleman claims he wants to discuss a $1 billion investment with Mr. Williams. He says he represents something called Thompson Investment Group." When David's eyes met Marcus's, Marcus felt a new surge of anger rise within him, different from what he'd felt before. This wasn't just the casual dismissal of a receptionist. This was the calculated assessment of someone who believed he held power over others. The disappointment cut deeper because David should have understood what it meant to face assumptions based on appearance, but instead he seemed eager to join in the judgment. "Thompson Investment Group?" David repeated, his tone suggesting he was humoring a child with an overactive imagination. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not familiar with that firm. Are you listed with the SEC? Do you have documentation of your assets under management?" Marcus felt his chest constrict as if he were drowning in shallow water. Here he was again, being asked to prove his existence, his success, his very right to occupy space in this world. The familiar sensation of being pushed back to childhood washed over him, to those moments when his white classmates couldn't believe he could afford the same toys they had, when teachers assumed his good grades were somehow suspicious, when success itself became something he had to justify rather than simply achieve. "I have documentation in my office," Marcus replied, his voice growing steadier even as his emotions churned beneath the surface. "I was hoping to arrange a preliminary meeting to discuss expanding our relationship with First National. I've done extensive research on your institution's current position in the market." David's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew colder. "Mr. Thompson. Marcus Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we have very specific procedures here. We work with established institutional investors, firms with proven track records and verified assets. Perhaps you might be more comfortable with one of the smaller banks in the area. They might be more accommodating to your situation." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. Marcus understood the code perfectly. He had heard variations of it his entire professional life, dressed up in polite language but carrying the same message. You don't belong here. In that moment, Marcus felt utterly alone, standing in a room full of people who saw him as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed or a threat to be neutralized. But he also felt something else stirring within him. Not just anger now, but a cold, calculating resolve. They wanted proof. They wanted verification. He would give them exactly what they were asking for. "Listen," David said, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "I don't know where you learned these financial terms, but this is a real bank, not some place where you can play dress-up CEO." The words struck Marcus like a physical assault. His face burned with a heat that had nothing to do with shame, and everything to do with pure, undiluted rage. Inside his mind, a voice was screaming, "I built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. I've overcome every obstacle they placed in my path, and you dare to treat me like a fraud?" But the pain ran deeper than the insult. This wasn't just about him. It was about every black child who would grow up being told their dreams were too big, every black professional who would be asked to prove their qualifications twice over, every black entrepreneur who would be denied opportunities before they even got a chance to speak. "Exactly," Sarah chimed in, emboldened by her manager's public display of dismissal. "People like this always think they can fake it till they make it. It's actually kind of sad when you think about it." The phrase, "people like this," hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. He felt his body begin to tremble, not with fear, but with the tremendous effort it took to contain the fury that threatened to consume him. These two words, casual, almost throwaway, carried the weight of centuries of oppression, the casual dehumanization that reduced him to nothing more than his skin color. Marcus forced himself to take a slow, measured breath. "I understand you have procedures," he said, his voice becoming more controlled, even as his emotions raged beneath the surface. "But I only need 15 minutes with Mr. Williams. You can call his office to confirm." David shook his head with the kind of condescending smile reserved for children who refused to accept reality. "Mr. Williams is in meetings with real investors today. Do you honestly think we're going to interrupt his schedule for some random walk-in? Please." It was in that moment that Marcus made his decision. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving with deliberate precision, despite their slight tremor. The text message was brief. Code red, First National Downtown, documentation needed. No one paid attention to his quiet communication. They were too busy enjoying their moment of superiority, too satisfied with their ability to maintain the natural order of their world. They didn't notice the change in Marcus's posture, the way his shoulders squared with new purpose, or the dangerous calm that settled over his features. Sarah noticed other customers in the lobby, well-dressed white patrons who were being served promptly and courteously, their credentials never questioned, their presence never challenged. The contrast wasn't lost on her, and she seemed to take pride in it, as if she were a guardian protecting something sacred from contamination. "These procedures seem to be applied rather selectively," Marcus observed quietly, more to himself than to them. But David heard him. "What did you say?" Marcus looked up, meeting David's gaze with steady eyes. "Nothing important," he replied. "I'll wait." But they had no idea what he was waiting for, or that the wheels of justice were already beginning to turn. The situation escalated when Patricia Collins emerged from the elevator, her silver hair perfectly styled, her navy suit speaking of decades in banking hierarchies. At 50, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had never been denied entry to any room she wanted to enter. Her appearance on the scene marked a dangerous turning point. "David, what's all this commotion?" she asked, her voice cutting through the lobby's murmur. "We can't have disruptions in the VIP area. This is highly irregular." Marcus straightened, gathering his patience for what he knew would be the third time he'd have to explain himself. Each repetition felt like another layer of his dignity being stripped away. Why should he have to prove himself again and again? Why was his word insufficient when others were taken at face value? "Ms. Collins, this is Marcus Thompson from Thompson Investment Group," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I've been trying to arrange a meeting with Mr. Williams regarding a significant investment opportunity. I've prepared detailed proposals about partnership expansion and mutual benefit structures. I've researched your bank's current financial position quite thoroughly." Patricia's expression shifted through several phases: initial skepticism, growing irritation, and finally, barely concealed disdain. "Sir, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but First National works exclusively with established institutional investors. Perhaps you should consider approaching smaller, more appropriate financial institutions that might be better suited to your circumstances." The coded language struck Marcus like a physical blow. More appropriate institutions? He understood the subtext perfectly. His anger was no longer the hot, explosive rage of moments before. Instead, it had crystallized into something colder, more dangerous, more purposeful. "I understand your position," Marcus replied, "but I believe you'll find Thompson Investment Group more than meets your institutional standards." David decided to escalate the situation further. He walked to the security station and picked up the phone, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Security, we have a persistent individual causing disturbance in the VIP area. He's making unrealistic claims about being some kind of billionaire investor. Claims to represent Thompson Investment Group. Never heard of them." When Marcus heard himself described as a persistent individual causing disturbance, he felt something break inside him. He was no longer Marcus Thompson, successful CEO and respected businessman. He had been redefined as a problem, a threat, a disturbance to be managed and removed. The dehumanization was complete. Two security guards approached, their hands resting casually on their equipment belts. Marcus raised his hand slightly, showing he had no intention of resistance. "I understand your position. I'll wait in the lobby area until Mr. Williams becomes available." "Sir," Patricia announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried throughout the lobby. "Mr. Williams does not meet with walk-in clients without proper verification and advance scheduling. This isn't how business is conducted at this level." The public nature of her announcement was clearly calculated to embarrass him, to make an example of what happened to people who didn't know their place. Marcus felt the eyes of every customer and employee in the building on him, some curious, some sympathetic, but most simply accepting this as the natural order of things. An elderly black customer near the waiting area caught Marcus's eye and shook his head sadly. "Young man," he said quietly, "maybe you should just go. This isn't worth the trouble." The comment, meant kindly, broke something in Marcus's heart. Here was a man who looked like him, who had undoubtedly faced similar situations throughout his life, advising him to accept defeat rather than fight for dignity. The resignation in the older man's voice spoke to decades of accumulated wounds, small defeats that had eventually led to the acceptance of limitations. But Marcus wasn't ready to accept those limitations. Not today. David returned from the security station with a satisfied smirk. "Sir, I need you to understand something. These people—" He gestured vaguely at Marcus. "These people always think they can waste our time with elaborate fantasies. Security will make sure you don't come back." Those two words, "these people," hit Marcus like a time machine, transporting him back to an era of open segregation, of separate drinking fountains and restricted access. All his achievements, all his struggles, all his careful construction of success seemed to evaporate in the face of such casual dehumanization. Marcus walked calmly to a chair in the lobby and sat down. He pulled out his phone once more and dialed a number. "Rebecca," he said quietly. "Initiate withdrawal protocol. Yes, all of it, today." His voice was steady, calm, almost eerily controlled. The rage had transformed into something else entirely, not anger anymore, but pure, focused determination. He was no longer trying to prove himself to these people. He was simply going to show them exactly who they had decided to cross. The game was about to change completely, and none of them saw it coming. The elevator doors burst open with unusual urgency, and Richard Williams practically ran into the lobby. At 62, the bank president rarely moved faster than a dignified walk. But today, panic had replaced protocol. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, his tie slightly askew, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the building's climate control. "Mr. Thompson!" he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet lobby. "Mr. Thompson, I am so terribly sorry. I was trapped in a Federal Reserve conference call about your withdrawal request." Every person in the lobby, customers, employees, security guards, froze. Patricia's face went ashen. David's confident smirk melted away, replaced by the dawning horror of understanding. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her desk. Marcus rose from his chair with deliberate calm, straightening his polo shirt as if he had all the time in the world. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had never needed to raise it to command attention. "Hello, Richard," he said, extending his hand. "I thought it would be appropriate to meet in person before finalizing any major changes to our banking relationship. Your staff has been quite thorough in their security procedures." Williams's face went through several shades of red as he realized what had transpired. He looked around the lobby, taking in the security guards, the stunned employees, and the crowd of curious onlookers. "Oh, dear God," he whispered. "What have they done?" "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the lobby, "I want to introduce Marcus Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of Thompson Investment Group. Mr. Thompson is our single largest individual investor, with $2.3 billion in deposits and investment partnerships currently managed by this institution." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in the marble-floored expanse. Patricia swayed on her feet, gripping the nearest counter for support. David's expensive suit suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds at SARS. Sarah's computer screen blurred as tears of realization filled her eyes. Marcus reached into his briefcase and withdrew his phone, holding it up so the screen was visible. "Richard, I want you to know that I recorded our entire interaction this morning. Your staff used coded racial language, made assumptions based on my appearance, and publicly humiliated a client who was seeking to discuss expanding a multi-billion-dollar relationship." Williams closed his eyes as if the words were physical blows. When he opened them, his face was set with grim determination. "Patricia, you're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The woman who had been so confident minutes before now stood shaking, the full weight of her actions crashing down upon her. "Mr. Williams, please, I didn't know—" "You didn't need to know." Williams cut her off. You needed to treat every person who walked through our doors with basic human dignity. That's not negotiable." He turned to David. "You're suspended pending a full investigation by our Diversity and Inclusion Department. Clean out your desk." Marcus watched the scene unfold with no sense of triumph, only a deep sadness for the necessity of it all. "Richard," he said quietly, "I want to be clear about something. I'm not here seeking revenge. But what happened today reveals systematic issues in your organization that go far beyond individual prejudices. How many other potential clients have been turned away at your doors? How many community members feel unwelcome in this institution?" Williams nodded gravely. "You're absolutely right. This is unacceptable, and it ends now." Marcus's response demonstrated the kind of leadership that had built his empire. Rather than demanding heads or threatening lawsuits, he focused on institutional change, on making sure that no one else would ever have to endure what he had experienced. The power he wielded wasn't just financial, it was moral, and everyone in that lobby could feel it. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Patricia Collins, who had walked into the lobby with the confidence of decades in banking, was now being escorted out by the same security guards she had summoned to remove Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. Her career at First National was over, but more than that, her actions had been recorded and would follow her throughout the industry. Williams turned to address the entire lobby, his voice carrying both authority and genuine remorse. "I want to apologize publicly to Mr. Thompson and to anyone who witnessed this inexcusable display of discrimination. This behavior does not represent the values of First National Bank, and we will conduct a comprehensive review of all our policies and procedures to ensure this never happens again." Sarah's termination came next, her employment ending not with the fanfare of her earlier confidence, but with quiet shame as she gathered her personal belongings. The recorded evidence of her discriminatory language made her position indefensible. She would struggle to find similar employment, as word of the incident had already begun to spread through professional networks. Within hours, the story had found its way onto social media. A customer who had witnessed the scene posted about it online, and the post began to go viral. National discrimination started trending locally, with other customers of color sharing their own experiences at various bank branches. The institution's stock price dipped as investors worried about potential lawsuits and reputation damage. But Marcus had something else in mind entirely. Instead of withdrawing his funds in anger, he proposed something that stunned everyone: a $50 million community investment fund, administered through First National, specifically designed to provide capital and support for minority-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. "This isn't charity," Marcus explained to Williams. "This is investment in community strength. It's about creating the opportunities that systematic discrimination has historically denied. If First National wants to rebuild trust with the community, this is how we do it." Williams, recognizing both the generosity and the shrewd business sense of the proposal, immediately agreed. The bank would not only administer the fund, but match it with an additional $25 million of their own capital. The announcement of the community fund transformed the narrative entirely. What could have been purely a story of discrimination and revenge became something larger, a story of transformation and hope. Williams used the moment to announce comprehensive diversity training for all employees, a community advisory board to guide inclusive practices, and a commitment to promoting qualified minority employees to management positions. Meanwhile, Patricia's story went viral for all the wrong reasons. Video clips of her condescending behavior, preserved on customer phones, circulated widely. Her name became synonymous with workplace discrimination, effectively ending her career in banking. The viral nature of her downfall served as a warning to others who might be tempted to judge clients based on appearance rather than substance. Other customers who had remained silent during the original incident now came forward, creating a culture of accountability that extended far beyond First National's walls. The ripple effects reached other financial institutions, many of which began reviewing their own practices to avoid similar public relations disasters. Marcus Thompson stood before the gathered crowd in the bank's conference room later that afternoon, addressing not only First National's leadership, but also community representatives and local media. His words carried the weight of experience, the authority of success, but most importantly, the wisdom of someone who had transformed personal pain into positive change. "This incident today wasn't really about me having money," he began, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. As he spoke, Marcus felt as if he were addressing every young person of color who had ever been told their dreams were too big, every professional who had ever been asked to prove themselves twice over. It was about dignity, respect, and the equal treatment that every human being deserves, regardless of their appearance, background, or the assumptions others make about them. He paused, looking around the room at faces that now hung on his every word. Those employees looked at my clothes, saw my race, and made immediate judgments about my worth, my capabilities, my right to be in that space. They never asked about my background, my qualifications, or my intentions. They simply decided I didn't belong. Marcus's reflection on systematic change carried the emotional weight of someone speaking to his younger self, the angry, powerless young man he had once been. Real change isn't just about firing discriminatory employees, though that's sometimes necessary. It's about creating systems where discrimination cannot flourish, where unconscious bias is addressed proactively, where every person who walks through your doors is treated with the respect they deserve. He gestured toward Williams. The $50 million community investment fund we're establishing isn't charity. It's an investment in community strength, in economic empowerment, in creating opportunities that systematic discrimination has historically denied to entire populations. It's about building bridges instead of walls. Marcus's voice grew more personal as he continued. I could have revealed my identity immediately when I walked into this bank. I could have demanded special treatment, pulled rank, used my wealth as a weapon, but I wanted to experience firsthand what others face every day. People who don't have billion-dollar portfolios to shield them from prejudice. His reflection on personal growth revealed a man who had learned to channel pain into purpose. What I learned today reinforced something I've always known. Power isn't about proving who you are. It's about using your position to lift others up, to create changes that benefited everyone, not just yourself. The universal message he delivered resonated beyond banking, beyond business, beyond any single industry. Whether you work in banking, retail, hospitality, or any service industry, the principle remains the same. Treat every person who enters your space with dignity and respect. You never know someone's full story, but more importantly, everyone deserves basic human courtesy, regardless of their story. Marcus concluded with a note of hope that transformed the energy in the room from shame and regret to possibility and commitment. First National is implementing real reforms. Other institutions are taking notice. Individual actions create waves of systematic change. What happened here today could be the beginning of something much larger, a fundamental shift in how we treat each other in professional spaces. Loi Keo Goi Handong and Treo Chok. Marcus Thompson's final words carried the authority of lived experience and the weight of hard-won wisdom. He looked directly into the cameras that had gathered, knowing his message would reach far beyond the confines of First National Bank. The next time you witness discrimination, whether it's in a bank, a restaurant, a store, or anywhere else, you have a choice to make. Will you stay silent, or will you speak up? Your voice has more power than you think. Silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in its continuation. His challenge to systematic change was direct and actionable. Support businesses that demonstrate genuine inclusive practices, not just those that put up the right signs and say the right words. Hold institutions accountable for their diversity commitments. Demand more than lip service. Demand results, measurable outcomes, real change in how people are treated. Marcus's call for individual responsibility struck at the heart of personal accountability. Check your own assumptions before you check someone else's credentials. That person you're quick to judge based on their appearance might surprise you, but respect them regardless of what they have or don't have. Dignity isn't contingent on wealth or status. He gestured toward the camera, speaking directly to viewers who would see this story unfold. Share this story if it moves you, but more importantly, share the lesson. Dignity isn't earned through achievement or accumulated through wealth. It's the birthright of every human being. It's not something to be granted or withheld based on someone else's comfort level. Marcus's final challenge was personal and immediate. The next time you see someone being treated unfairly, ask yourself one simple question. What kind of person do I want to be in this moment? The answer to that question defines not just who you are, but what kind of world we create together. He stepped back, his presence commanding the room even in silence, before delivering his closing words with the kind of quiet authority that comes from having lived through struggle and emerged stronger. True power isn't about proving who you are or what you have. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their circumstances, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Justice isn't just about revenge against those who wrong us. Justice is about revolution, the revolution of changing hearts, minds, and systems so that what happened to me today never has to happen to anyone else. The room fell silent as Marcus Thompson, the man who had walked in as a dismissed nuisance and revealed himself as a force for transformation, gathered his materials and walked toward the door. But his final glance back at the cameras held a promise and a warning. Change was coming, and everyone had a choice about which side of history they wanted to be on.